What is up guys? Welcome back to KitGuru. So today I am working again on the AMD frame custom build. You can probably see not a lot has happened with the build since the last video, which was the first video where we changed the colour scheme of the motherboard from its normal black to this white and silver colour scheme that you can see now, because that is going to be the theme of this system. There's still a lot of work to be done on this. I'm currently in the process of making up the custom cables. You can see this is one of the PCIe cables that's half made up. I've already made a couple more of those, and the EPS cables. I still need to finish this one off and then make up the 24 pin cable, which is probably the most difficult out of all of them. So as I said, not a lot has been done since the last video, but that's about to change today. So I think one of the most important things when building one of these custom systems is to make some custom power cables as well, because they just put a final finishing touch on the system and just make it look like a real professional finish to the build. So with this system, as I said, it's a white and silver colour scheme, so we've obviously got some white sleeving, and also I think this is called Platinum or Platinum X sleeving, so that's the closest I could get to silver. So I think these should again put a nice finishing touch on the system and just give it that professional look when it's completed. You might remember, if you've seen any of these custom builds before, I think it was the Seasonic Aura build, where I actually went through the process of making up custom power cables in some detail. And if you are really interested in making up your own cables, I suggest to go and have a look at that video, because as I said, I went into the detail of how to create the cables from start to finish. That was a while ago, so I'm just going to give you a quick recap really on how custom cables are made, what you need to make custom cables, and not so much run you through the whole process, but just give you a quick rundown on how to actually sleeve them and crimp terminals on and everything like that. So you will need to invest in a few tools to build the power cables. They're not expensive, quite basic tools, but without them you will be struggling really to build the cables at all. And obviously there is the hardware to build the actual cables as well, which you will also need. So in terms of wire, you can see, because these are white cables, or some of them are white, I'm using white wire here, and this is a 16 gauge wire. I tend to buy it on these, I think these are 30 meter reels, and I buy these and the terminals from RS Components in the UK. It seems to be a good place to buy them from, really fast delivery from RS as well. So 16 gauge wire I tend to use for the main cables, so the PCIe, the EPS and the 24 pin, and then if I need to build any SATA power cables, I tend to use 18 gauge wire for that. I find the 16 gauge is better for holding the shape. If you want to bend the cable into a certain shape and hold it in that shape with cable combs, I find that the 16 gauge is the best. And then you will obviously need some terminals for the wire as well. So these are the Molex ATX terminals. These again can be bought in different sizes to suit the wire that you're using. So these are designed for 16 gauge wire, and I tend to buy them on these magazines as well, and they work out really cheap. I think less than 5p per terminal if you buy them on these magazines as well. So they're not expensive, but you will need a lot of them obviously when you're making up several cables. The other thing you'll need obviously as well is the sleeving. So as I said before, we're using white and silver. This is PET sleeving. There is also paracord as well, but I prefer to use this PET sleeving. And this is a AMD PCX sleeving. I think it's probably the best stuff you can get really. I buy this from a company called Pexon PCS in the UK. Again, they're usually pretty efficient with delivery and stuff, and pricing as well is as good as you're going to get it from anywhere else. I think you can buy this from OC UK as well, but it's a little bit more expensive from OC UK. And this is a obviously white and then Platinum X, and they have hundreds of different colours you can choose from, so you can get more or less any combination of colour you need to suit the build that you're doing. You'll also need some heat shrink as well for melting the PET sleeving to the actual wire, and I'll show you how that's done in a bit. I think this is 7mm heat shrink, and I think it's a 3:1 ratio, and it's not got the adhesive on the inside, because some of that has adhesive on the inside and you don't want that for this process. Another bit of hardware that will be extremely useful when building these cables, in fact you'll struggle to build them without them, are these heat shrink solder joints. On some of the cables you'll find that you've got double wires, so 2 wires go into 1 pin, and you'll need something like this to build up those wires. So what you've got here is a solder ring in the middle, and then the outer is a heat shrink wrap. And how these work is you push your cables in from either end, so you push 2 in from one end and 1 in from the other, heat up the whole thing, and then the soldering will melt and fuse the wires together, and then the outer heat shrink will shrink over the wire and insulate it. So they are essential for when building the cables. You'll struggle to build the cables without those. And then in terms of tools, you will need to buy some tools to build up cables, unless you already have these in your toolbox. They're not expensive tools, quite basic, but you will need these to build the cables up. So generally speaking, all I need to build cables up are some wire cutters, some diagonal cutters of some sort, some auto wire strippers. You don't technically need these. You could use the diagonal cutters, but it's easier, probably a bit more accurate, and you're less likely to damage the actual core of the wire using the auto wire strippers. Another tool that's essential and really cheap is this Molex pin removal tool. So this is just a couple of quid off eBay. I've had this for probably 3 years, this tool now, and it's still working. It is quite fragile, it looks quite fragile, but if you're careful with it, you should be able to get plenty of cables made up using that. Probably the most expensive tool you need to buy is one of these terminal crimps. So these are designed for the Molex ATX pins. I think I bought this in a kit. It was actually not too expensive from Amazon. It was one of the cheaper ones out there. I think AMD PCX, who make the sleeving, do their own version of this, which is a lot more expensive than this one. But after a few attempts, I found that this works perfectly. And again, I've been using this for a few years and it's still working as well as it did when I bought it. A digital multimeter as well will be very useful, especially if you don't know the pinouts of the wire and you need to find those manually. This is just a cheap one that I use for continuity. You'll also probably need to use a lighter for melting the sleeving onto the wire. That'll come in handy, and a heat gun as well. So this is used for melting the soldering connectors and the heat shrink wrap that I put over the top of those. That's basically all the tools you'll need. I don't think there's anything that I've missed. You might want a Seasonic water bottle to have on hand as well for when you get thirsty. But other than that, that's pretty much everything you'll need to build your cables. So on to actually building the cables, and as I said, I'm not going to spend too much time on that today because I did cover it in great detail in the Seasonic Aura video, and if you want to see the whole process, go and watch that video back again. Today's just a refresher really for those that probably did see the first video and are thinking of building cables up again, but they just want to refresh the memory on certain things. The first thing to do when building cables as well is make sure you know the pinouts of your original cables and of the power supply. There are plenty of resources online to find that information. If you just do a search for something like Seasonic Prime TX cable pinouts, you'll quickly see there's plenty of images and diagrams that will help. I also like to just do a continuity test just to make sure and to double check, because the last thing you want to do is get one of the cables mixed up, plug it into your hardware and potentially cause some damage. So once you know the pinouts, if you want to just use the standard cables with the length, you can just de-pin the terminals, sleeve each cable individually, then put them back together, which is a really simple process. But if you want to change the length to a custom length, and maybe you want to use different color wire like this, you'll need to first measure out how long a piece of cable is. So what I do is either use a piece of wire or some string and just thread it through really from the power supply to the hardware. So this is PCIe, so from the power supply to the graphics card, just measure it out. So this one's 450 millimeters. What I like to do as well is cut all these to length first. So for PCIe, if it's if there's 3 PCIe cables, I'll cut 24 pieces at 450 millimeters long, and then what I'll do is just strip the ends. You only need to take probably 2 or 3 millimeters off the end. I think 2 millimeters is probably enough. So just strip those back with your auto wire strippers, and then using your crimp terminals, pop those in the tool, and you have to pull them right back so they go up to the stop in the tool, and then just start crimping it very slightly so that it opens up the terminal a little bit. Pop your wire in. I found you need to give it a good push in as well to make sure that the wire is seated right back in the terminal, and then just simply compress the tool. It's on a ratchet system, and then you'll find that when it's open you have a perfectly crimped terminal like that. Do the same on the other side, so pop the terminal in the tool, pull it right back until it stops, start crimping it up just to open it out, push in your wire, push it all the way in, make sure it's all the way up, and then crimp it in place. And again, you've got a perfectly crimped terminal there. The next step then is to measure out the sleeving, and what I like to do is just melt the end of it first, just to stop it fraying. So just touch it with the lighter, it melts very quickly, and then you need to just pop the wire right next to the sleeving, about where you can see there on the neck of the terminal, and then just pull it reasonably tight all the way down to the other end, and then using your cutters or scissors, cut it off to length, and then again just melt it a little bit to stop the sleeving from fraying. And then you just need to thread the wire down the sleeving. You can usually thread it so far and then it might get stuck, and then you find it just pushing it and holding it and then releasing like that will get it the rest of the way down until it pops out of the end. And it's a good idea when you're at this point just to pull the sleeving down again about halfway along the neck of the terminal, and then pulling it tight to the other end just to check that it is the correct length, and that looks pretty good. And then to hold the sleeving in position, what you need to do is take a couple of pieces of this heat shrink wrap, so cut them off probably about 15mm pieces. You need a couple of those, and then just pull the sleeving to the position it needs to be, so it's halfway up the neck of the terminal. Slide over the heat shrink wrap so that it covers the sleeving, and then use the lighter, and you want to shrink this down and really keep it burning until it's melting and you can see the heat shrink bubbling. And then just once it's cool enough, just press it down with your fingers. Then you can either get a knife blade or your cutters, and then just pull off the heat shrink wrap, and then you're left with the sleeving that is now permanently melted to the terminal. So to do the other side, you want to pull it as tight as you can, pull it down the wire so that it's again halfway along the neck of the terminal. Same thing again, slide your heat shrink wrap over, melt it in position so that you see it start bubbling and burning away. Let it slightly cool, and then just flatten it down. Press it down really hard, because if you leave it sticking out, it might find that you've got trouble when you actually try and put it back in the connector. And then again, just give it a clip with the snips, pull off the heat shrink, and you can see again that's nicely melted to the wire. Once you've done that, then you need to take the, I actually forgot to mention these originally as well, you'll need some PCIe and 24 pin and everything else, the connectors for them. What you can do is actually you could recycle the ones off your original wires. If you don't want to keep these original wires, just reuse those, or you can buy all these separately as well from places like RS Components, or I think even PEX and PCS, they sell those as well. So once you've got the wire melted with the sleeving melted on, all you need to do then is, using the pinout diagrams, just pop these back into the connector on both ends, and that is basically it. Just follow the pinout diagrams, make the whole cables up using that process. And again, like I said, once you have made the cables up, the best thing to do as well is test the pinouts as well, because you don't want to be plugging these into your hardware until you're absolutely certain that you've got the pinouts correct. So what you can do really to test the PCIe cables is plug them into your power supply, use the original 24 pin cable and one of those adapters that just jump starts the power supply, and then use your digital multimeter and then test the pinouts, make sure you're getting 12 volts and grounds in the correct positions. If you do make a mistake when you're building your cables, this is where this tool comes in really useful. So all you need to do to then take the wire out of the housing is just slot this tool down the side. You can just see there's just enough space in there to slot that tool in, and what that does is pushes the little wings back that lock the wire in place, and then just pull it out and it releases quite simply as well. So if you do make a mistake, it's not the end of the world. You can disassemble the cable again and change the positions of the wires. So that's basically it, how you build your cables. I've, like I said, already made a start on those. What I'm going to do now is finish off that 24-pin cable and this final PCIe cable, and then I'll be back because we've got a lot more to do on this system. I want to mount that LCD screen, and I also need to test everything as well, because I've not actually tested this since doing the work on the motherboard, so it'll give me a good opportunity to test that and to test these cables. So I'll get on with the rest of the cables and I'll be back soon. So all the cables are complete now. You can see the 24 pin, the PCIe and the EPS cables all finished. Not looking very neat at the moment, but they will have some white cable combs and they'll be a lot neater than that for the final system. I did test them with the multimeter before connecting everything up, just to make sure that all the voltages are at the correct pins. Everything's working fine. As you can see, I've just installed this 360mm all-in-one CPU cooler temporarily because I just want to check that everything's working as it should be after doing the motherboard mod and obviously the cables as well. So I'm just actually running Cinebench R23 in a loop. It's been going now for maybe longer than 30 minutes, so everything's up to temperature as well. The main thing I wanted to check was the temperature of the VRM MOSFETs because I replaced the thermal pads on those after modding the motherboard, and I'm just looking at this now. Like I said, this test's been running for a while and it's showing the VRM MOSFETs at 51 degrees, so that seems perfectly good to me. And also the chipset as well, because I put some new thermal compound on there and that is just under 50 degrees as well, so that all seems good. Also, while we've got the system set up as it is, I'm just going to stop this now because that all seems good. So stop that, and you can see I was monitoring those temperatures with HW info, but I've also in the background got the AMD Adrenalin software running as well, and I'm in the performance section. The good thing about this now as well is it gives you information as well as about the graphics card. It also gives you information on the CPU as well, so you can see I've actually just opened up more details on here, but this is what you're faced with when you open up the Adrenalin software and go into the performance section. So you've got one section for the graphics card, another section for the CPU, also information on the memory as well there. So if you want additional information, you can see there you've got the GPU utilization, clock speeds, power consumption, temperature, which is a good one to have available, and then the junction temperature, fan speed as well. It's all there and available. As well as that, you can also monitor the status of the CPU as well. So you can see AMD Ryzen 7 5800 X3D, which is the CPU we have installed. Utilization is, well, 1% at the moment because it's basically idling, but again, you can have additional information, and then you can see the peak clock speeds, voltage, temperature again, which is very useful to have on here, and then power consumption. You can also, from this Adrenalin software, launch the Ryzen Master software, so you can launch that directly from the Adrenalin software. And if you had a CPU that you wanted to overclock or was overclockable, because we have the 5800 X3D, which is a locked multiplier. Normally with the other AMD Ryzen CPUs, you'd be able to go into Ryzen Master, either manually overclock, or you can use the auto overclocking function that's in here. Because we've got the 5800 X3D, we can't do that, but we can, again, monitor the status of the CPU in here. So again, that's a useful tool to have. Another really useful thing about the Adrenalin software, if you go into the tuning section under performance, so on here you can see we've got the GPU there, the 6950 XT, the default tuning profile, so that's just basically running the card in its stock configuration. On here you also have some automatic overclocking presets, so you can undervolt the GPU. So if you click on that and then just accept all the warning messages, the Adrenalin software will automatically undervolt the GPU, potentially giving you some power consumption savings, and also potentially helping the card run a bit cooler. Alternatively, if you want, you can overclock the GPU. So again, click on that and then accept the warning message, and there you go. That's automatically overclocked the GPU core frequency to just over 2.7 gigahertz. And again, same with the VRAM as well, so you can automatically overclock the VRAM. So again, click the warning messages, accept the warning messages, and then the software will automatically overclock the VRAM as well. So it's a really useful tool. And then alternatively, if you are, shall we say, a more experienced user, you go into manual tuning, and then in here you can play around with GPU frequency and the voltage, and you can also in here change the memory configuration. And another useful feature as well is be able to tune the fan speed as well. So you could potentially, even if you're not overclocking, you could potentially tune the fan speeds to your liking. So if you think the stock fan curve is a bit loud, you can go into the Adrenalin software here and quieten the fans down, or have the fans running to your liking. So it's come on a long way in the last couple of years, and there's also a lot of other features built into the software. So if you go on to, go into the record and streaming, on here you're able to record gameplay. So if you do something amazing in a game, you can just click a shortcut key and it'll record a certain length of your gameplay that you want. And also on here you can use this for streaming as well. So if you're into streaming your gameplay and you want to broadcast yourself, you can now use the Adrenalin software instead of using something like OBS. Something else you might find useful on the Adrenalin software now is AMD Link. What this does is it basically allows you to create a cloud gaming server on your own PC, and you can connect your mobile device. So you could connect your phone, you could connect a tablet, you could even connect your TV to this, and then you can play games remotely away from your PC. It also allows you to connect 4 other people to the PC, so you could potentially play local multiplayer games together. If you've got quite a busy lifestyle, you're on the move a lot, AMD Link could be useful to you as well. Last time I built one of these custom systems for AMD, the AMD Behemoth system, in the final video of that series, I spoke about FSR, Fidelity FX Super Resolution, which is a feature built into certain games that improves performance by upsampling the resolution. Nowadays, we also have RSR, which is Radeon Super Resolution. Unlike FSR, which is a game level feature, RSR is a driver level feature. So for those games that don't feature FSR, you can now use Radeon Super Resolution. RSR is built in directly to the Adrenalin software, and it is quite simple to set up. You just need to enable it on the Adrenalin software, and then there's a little bit of setup to do in the game as well. But as I said, this will help to improve the performance, your FPS in games that don't feature FSR. So again, another good addition to the software. And obviously we've still got features such as Radeon Anti-Lag and Radeon Image Sharpening, and you can either configure these manually using the custom button, or if you just want to use the automatic configuration. So if you're going to use the system for gaming, you can just click on gaming and the software will adjust best settings for gaming. Or if you're a fan of esports, play a lot of esports, you can click the esports tab and again the software will automatically set it up. And if you want to save power and save the planet, you can also use the power saving, and then again software automatically sets it up for you. So as I said, there's a lot to the Adrenalin software these days, and it's worth checking out all these other features because you might find something in there that you might find useful. So that's all the main power cables sorted. Obviously, as I've said, they're going to look a lot neater when I build the system for real with cable combs, and obviously cable manage a lot better than they do. But I also want to take a look at some of the other cables and wires in the system, in particular the wires that go to these EK pump res combo. So this is an EK Quantum Kinetic pump res combo, and it's got a genuine Xylem D5 PWM pump on here. These are also going to be changed a little in terms of the aesthetics with the colour scheme, so I'm going to be painting a few things white as well to match in with the colour scheme. But I also want to make sure that the cables fit in with the colour scheme as well. So you notice that these pumps come with a SATA connection on there, and normally you would be connecting up something like this to your power supply, a SATA power cable. This end would plug in directly to your power supply, and then the pump res combo would plug into that. That's going to look a little bit messy and a bit unnecessary as well for a custom system like this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to disassemble the pump, get rid of the SATA connection completely. That won't be needed. And I've got a load of these 6-pin Molex connections that connect directly into the Seasonic power supply. So instead of having the SATA power cable on there, it's just going to be replaced by the one that goes directly into the power supply. I'm also going to change this wire for white wire, and then I'm going to sleeve it using the white and grey sleeving, I think maybe just white. And as well as that, the PWM cable as well. This potentially could be a bit shorter, and this will also be sleeved as well. And I'll also look at maybe doing something with the RGB cable as well. Maybe I can desolder that from this RGB lighting ring, sleeve that cable, and then that should all be looking good as well. So to do this, I'm going to have to disassemble this pump. So take this locking ring off the bottom, and then the actual pump unit just comes out. And then on the bottom of the pump is just this cap. You notice as well that all the wires going through this hole here. I guess I might have to make that hole a bit bigger once I get the cable sleeving on, but we'll see about that in a bit. So I'm just going to prise this cap off, and then with this cap prised off, just release these wires, and then just pull that back a bit to give me a bit of breathing space. So you can see inside here the wires for the PWM control. They're both soldered directly to the PCB there. Then the 12 volt and the ground wire, they're also soldered in there as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to desolder all these, change them for the cables that I'm going to be using. These are the two pieces of wire that I'm using for the main power. It's a bit shorter obviously, as you can see, and they're also white, so they'll look identical to the rest of the power cables. And I'll also look at shortening that PWM cable as well, and then probably sleeve that as well with some white sleeving. Okay, so there are the improved cables. We've got a white and grey cable that'll plug directly into the power supply now, and then we have the RGB cable as well, which I've sleeved in the silver or the Platinum X sleeving, and then the PWM cable that is also sleeved in the Platinum X sleeving. I did have to put some heat shrink wrap on the PWM and the RGB cable, but that will sit here in front of a 480 radiator, and then that'll allow me just to plug the power directly into the power supply, and the PWM will probably go to one of the fan headers up here. RGB cable will plug into whichever RGB header is available, and there'll obviously be another one of these at the other side that will have the same modified cabling on. So they're looking good. The rest of the power cables will look good when they're managed and when the system's built up for the final time. So we're making some good progress. The next mod that I'm going to do on this will be fitting that LCD screen. I'm pretty certain that I'm going to fit it down here, probably cut out some of this and sink the LCD screen in behind, and maybe make some surround for it. Once that's done, I need to go completely strip everything down again. The chassis frame's going off to be professionally painted. I might send off some of these other bits as well, some of the bits and pieces off the pumps and anything else that needs painting white. Radiators I did a bit of work on last time, so they're almost ready to be fitted to the system. The water block as well, CPU water block, that was all modified last time. So we are making good progress, and it's starting to not so much come together because it does look quite a mess still at the moment, but it's starting to get the picture of how it's going to look in the end. So I'm happy so far with the progress. Still plenty of work to be done, but we are getting there. So I hope you enjoyed watching part 2 of the KitGuru AMD frame custom build. If you have, let us know what you think so far in the comment section. If you've enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you've not done so already, and if you enjoy the content from KitGuru, you can support us by heading over to our store, picking up some merch. You could even subscribe to our Patreon, and as always, don't forget, if you want to catch up on all the in-depth technical reviews, head over to the website.